One of the young men that I had the privilege to provide services for came out of the school system. And at 13 years of age, he spent most of his time beating up other kids. And eventually, the educational system decided that he didn't belong in education there, and they decided then that he needed to go to a residential placement. He continued to beat up children, and he went through, I think it was 6 different residential placements before he ran into someone who could help him and be useful to him. This guy diagnosed that he had an anger problem. And what he needed to do with him was to get him tired. Now, I believe that that's the greatest intervention to kids. Tired kids do not cause them any problem. So he taught this guy to chin and to do push-ups, and he ran him, and he would get him tired every day. And the kids started to bulk up. And he got really big. And it worked so well that he stopped beating up kids and started beating up staff in the facility that he was in. So the facility then decided that he needed to be in juvenile justice. And so they sent him to our correctional facility out in St. Charles, Illinois, where he did okay for about 3 months until he got really angry, got in a fight with another young man, took 5 people to separate him, and they threw him into what I would call a solitary confinement cell. Though they called it something else. It was solid oak wood with steel strips through the door. Well, the young man did not want to be there, so he physically tore the door off the hinges and he came out. Now, here's 1 or 2 young people that I worked with in my career who's actually gotten kicked out of jail. Because they decided that there was nothing they could do to provide help or services for him. And so they then decided to try to turf him to mental health. And mental health said, oh no, we have nothing to do with him. He didn't come in through our system, so you're going to have to find someone else. Mental health then decided, well, he came in through education, why don't you call them? So they tried to turf him to education. Education had worked with him before and was not enthusiastic about working with him again. So a very good social worker in the school system decided that, hey, didn't they take custody in order to get him services? And isn't he really a child welfare kid? So they turfed him to child welfare. Now, child welfare, unfortunately, at that time, from their point of view, from my point of view, fortunately, won the class action suit, and they were going to have to provide services. So they did what you do with a young man who physically can tear doors off hinges and get kicked out of jail. They started looking for services in Texas, in Seattle, in Florida, and in Maine, as far away from Chicago as they possibly could. And they would get these nice little things back for the referrals. Things that said like, oh my God, he sounds like a wonderful kid, but he just will not fit into our milieu. And the kind of phrases that people like to use when they're turning you down. And it was at that point that we were called and we were asked to come because they knew that we would provide services for him. And I came in, and the first thing, after they got through telling me how horrible and how bad he was, they handed me his file. Now, his file was like this. And one of the things about me, and I actually had to say I cheated that once because I looked at his file, and I never look at files of children or families before I talk to them, because what I discovered is a lot of times the files are just not correct at all. And I want to find out from the people themselves. So I looked at the file, and there was 2 things in there that kind of stood out. One was that he really liked athletics. And the other thing was that his mom had visited him twice a month, no matter where he was. And to get out to St. Charles, it would take her 2.5 hours on the bus. So I talked to the worker from DCFS, and he said, what are you going to do with this one, Karl? Put chains on it? I said, no, I think I'm going to send him home to his mother. It was so quiet in the room. The worker got up and went out, got on the telephone, called the kid's mom and said, there's a fool named Karl Dennis who's going to come by there and try to talk you in to taking Alan back home. And she said, I can't take Alan back home. He can't stay here. And so he felt his job was done. So now it was my job to go out and to talk to Alan's mom. I got one foot on the bottom step. She popped out of that screen door. She pointed a finger at me and she said, boy, I know who you are and he is not coming home. And I said, well, yes, ma'am. Do you think we could talk for a little bit? She said, boy, I do not even want to talk to you. So I used an intervention that has never failed me. I reached up and I wiped my brow. I said, you know, I'm feeling a little warm. Do you think I could have a glass of water? And she looked at me for a minute, and then she went in and she got me a glass of water. Now, I followed her right on in the house. Now, if you try this and people are still angry, then you need to get out of there as fast as you can. That's one of the things about in-home services. Very few people ever get hurt in in-home services because you're not trying to keep people from getting out of where they are. So I always, anytime I'm in anyone's house, I will look around and I will find something to compliment them on. Never lie, and there's always something. And she had a really nice picture on the wall. I said, ma'am, you know, that's a really nice picture you got there. And she said, thank you very much. Would you drink your water and get out? And I said, well, yes, ma'am, I understand you're too busy to see me today. So maybe I'll have to come back tomorrow, and then I'll come back the next day, and then I had to come back the next day. But I got to come back until we can spend at least 10 minutes talking, and you can get rid of me if you spend the 10 minutes, which seemed to appeal to her. So I said to her, I'd like to ask you a few things. And I've got this magic wand. I used to carry one of those lucite sticks with glitter in it. And I said, I want to play with this with you. Now, she said, he's not coming home. I said, yes, ma'am, but if you can give me some answers, maybe sometime down the line, I will be able to provide the service for some other family that may need it. I'd like to wave the wand and just tell me what you think he would need, you know, and I know he can't come home. So I waved the wand the first time, and she said that, you know, when Alan was at home, he had decided he didn't want to go to school or something, and I'd had to get up and leave him at home because I had to get to work to support us, and he knew that, and so he would just procrastinate until I had to leave him there. I said, well, suppose we had a couple guys who would come by here in the morning and be their job to get Alan up and take Alan to school. How would that be? She said, well, that would be okay. So I waited a while again, and I asked her what else would she need, and she said, well, you know, when Alan went to school, seemed like I didn't do that. Said when Alan went to school, it seemed like that he was only there an hour before I got a call from the school saying he's in trouble again, get up here, and my boss would be saying, you know, you've taken off a lot of days. You know, maybe you don't need this job. I said, well, yes, ma'am. I said, we work with the school system, and I think that we can go up and we can talk the school into allowing us to bring staff into the school anytime they feel that they need it, and they will stay there all day. If they have to stay, they'll do whatever they need to do, and we will not design any intervention for him unless you okay it. How would that be? She said, well, that would be pretty good. So I waited a while again, and I asked her what else would she need, and she said, well, he needs therapy, you know, and he's learned how to get out of therapy by just threatening to kill the therapist. And they seem to always discharge him. And I said, well, you know, we know some therapists, and I think that we could talk one into taking him in, and I would guarantee that he would see the same therapist for at least 2 years, because we changed therapists, and we wonder why kids don't like therapy. And I said, in order to ensure that, I would have somebody in the room with them that was bigger than Alan and bigger than the therapist, and that would be that person's job to keep Alan from killing the therapist. How would that be? She said, well, that would be okay. And I waited a while again. I asked her what else would she need, and she said, well, she said, you know, this stuff sounds pretty good. She says, you know, but I used to come home from work, and I was always tired, and I got to tell you the truth, I just didn't have the patience to deal with him, and I'd set him off myself. I said, okay, suppose we picked him up from school, we see he likes sports, and we would take him out, and I'm going to recruit a couple guys from the football team up at the community college, and they would run with him and they would jump. And when they brought him home, it would be 7 or 7:30, and he'd be as tired as hell. How would that be? And she said, well, that would be pretty good. So I waved the wand again and asked her what else would she need. And she said, all this sounds pretty good. She said, the only problem is that Alan is going to hurt somebody, and it's probably going to be me. I said, well, yes, ma'am. I said, well, most parents can tell me when their kids are getting ready to go off. Can you? She said, honey, I can almost tell you 2 hours ahead of time. So I said, well, suppose I guarantee that any time you call, I would have someone here within 45 minutes. And they would stay as long as they needed to stay. And if we had to switch other people in, we would do that. How would that be? And she said, that would be pretty good, but what about on the weekends? I said, on the weekends? She said, well, what about in the middle of the night? And I said, yes, ma'am, in the middle of the night. She said, what about holidays? You professionals do not like to work on holidays. And I said, yes, ma'am, holidays as well. So I waved the wand again and asked her what else would she need. And she looked at me for a minute and she said, you know, I really can't think of anything else right now. I said, okay, how about Monday? Could we bring Alan home Monday? And she looked at me and laughed, and we brought Alan home and we placed him in the house, and we plugged in a tremendous amount of people coming and going. It only cost us about $40-something thousand a year because we used a lot of volunteers to do so. And this is compared to the $160,000 a year services that wouldn't even accept him in. They wouldn't even accept him in. And we found this strange thing from Alan. We found out that one of the reasons he was beating up people was because he wanted to be at home. So we sent him home. And I was happy to say that after 3 years of us working with him and his family and finding him a job at one of the local newspapers, he was becoming a typesetter. He had a lot of skills. And I still hate the day that he came to the office and explained to me that he made more money now than any of our staff.